abuse in Parliament and so on. The social media has transformed, for example, the whole migration phenomenon in the last 5 years, because people have mobile phones in Africa and they know people in Sweden, and that has changed the world. The power of the combination of social media and transparency in the sense of identifying and publicising injustice, to my mind, is in the future enormously important. So that I would just emphasise. And just by way of an upbeat note, because there was a lot of talk today about glacial pace of change, you never know when the change is going to happen. And just a vignette, when I was a first-year undergraduate in 1968 at Trinity College, Cambridge, Rab Butler, the former Tory minister, the future of all aspects of college life. And at the first meeting, the entire meeting was taken up with meals. High tables should remain perpendicular to the students' tables. And under any other business, the question raised was whether there should be female members of the college. And this was treated by the vice master and the dean, who were also on the committee, with the same solemnity and gravity as though the question had been whether Martians should be admitted as members of the college. King's had its first woman fellow, and like the LBJ domino theory of Southeast Asia, the dominoes fell with immense speed. And so here you have Rab Butler, the Ancien Regime, 5 minutes before the floodgates opened and everything changed.
Very good. Jacob.
Yeah, I was hoping for the 1.5 days we had discussions and very fruitful debates and nice papers. For one point to be raised and hasn't been raised, so I just wanted to comment that, I mean, gender has been reiterated and reproduced as a very binary concept the last 1.5 days, and I just wanted to stress that we're leaving out a lot of people who either identify as something in between or something outside perhaps, by stressing gender as solely women and men, and talking about it more in the terms of sex than actually thinking about queer and transgender and how some countries treat homosexuals perhaps as a separate gender as well when they're politically persecuted. And yeah, especially if we take the prioritarian approach that Diane has just outlined and thinking about the least well off really and the ones who are most marginalized, it's often, well, the largest group is obviously most of the time women, but those who are even worse off sometimes is those we do not even think about or ignore in our debates.
Thank you for reminding us. Very important. Fenella?
Can I just butt in first?
Please do.
Response. The journal Gender and Development, we're bringing out an issue on sexualities in March next year, so I'm just currently editing papers on precisely those topics. And my old college at Cambridge, which was Newhall but is now sadly known as Murray Edwards, has just announced, as some people will have read in The Guardian, that they are extending their policy from being female only to now having transsexuals there. They're not. They haven't answered what they might do if an existing woman member of the college decides to transition to be a man. In my opinion, they're on the wrong side of history, and they should, in my opinion, you know, when we are able to respond to their very correct ideas that those colleges are a female space because we need a female space because of gender inequality, actually they should probably just be dismantling and inviting everybody to become a member. But you know, levity aside, well, I'm not being very humorous actually at all, but you know, not focusing on the absolutely critical things that you've said. I think it's absolutely something that gender and development as a field of theory and activism is grappling with and has been grappling with actually intersectionally. We've been grappling with it all the time because we've been doing gender, race, class and other aspects of diversity in the field and understanding that there's no social justice without looking in that way. But certainly if we're looking at binaries in terms of women and men and their inclusion in particular spaces, there is a whole set of issues around what we do at the moment as pragmatists in a world of gender inequality and injustice, to make sure women are in there, but also to respond to the evolving awareness that those binaries really are effectively meaningless in many respects. But please read the issue when it comes out.
Okay. Good advert. Fenella.
Thank you. So you mentioned something about where do we need to put some more work in, and it's a slight problem to articulate that, because I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but there's something that troubles me slightly about the idea of collective agency and how it's such an important aspect of moving forwards, and yet it's also a very problematic aspect. And I think those of us who've been involved in various movements know sort of something quite deep inside about how unruly it is and how difficult it is to negotiate agendas in these collective spaces. And I suppose for me there's just more that we need to know about collective agency, about different spaces in which interests can be articulated. And I think this idea of positionality and who are the we is a really important part of that, because collective spaces replicate so much the power relationships of the context in which they exist, and there is it is very unusual to have women's rights groups working alongside trade unions, and for that to be the case. It troubles me why that is the case. We don't really understand what are the kind of real rubs there, and yet there are rubs, and we're constantly arguing in these collective spaces. So I think there's something around that I'd like to explore more. And I know there's loads and loads of literature, but I just don't think we're there yet. It's still very difficult, and it's still, these spaces are very, very fraught. And very creative in their fraughtness. I mean, how much do we want to discipline them? So sorry, very inarticulate.
And in many ways, each situation is different, which is the point that's been made earlier. So even if we could analyse them and get good practice, it might not.
It wouldn't work.
It might not be. I mean, no, let's not say it wouldn't. But on the other hand, if you think of big political disputes, for example, Northern Ireland and so on, or even the Norway intervention in the Middle East, some skilled people with experience can make differences, because they are to some extent more neutral and more experienced, and can settle conflict. I don't know if that's helpful. Who else would like to come in? Diane, please.
Just to respond to her for a minute.
Please.
I thought that was a thought that, again, you must be so shocked that I'm only thinking of the title for a report, partly because once you have an idea of where you want to go, you can put all the bricks together. What does gender inequalities teach us? Because you're talking of the various levels and places and differences in gender inequalities. And gender includes all genders, only women and men. So, and this workshop had many examples of how gender inequality has been overcome or studied. So what does this review of gender inequalities teach us about equality and inequality? That's a kind of another way of summing up what it is. Sorry, someone else is going to speak.
Yes, I was just wondering whether a possibility of linking some of these things would be to think more about comparative analysis, because that would be a way of providing some kind of connections between what takes place at the macro level and different forms of inequality at different levels. Because I'm thinking back to the kind of varieties of capitalism or comparative welfare regimes or something like that. So I think one of the problems with a lot of these world reports that you get is you get a concept like empowerment, and then you get examples from here, examples from there, and you don't really understand the mechanisms through which this translation takes place. So some sort of more serious consideration of being comparative. I'm still puzzling in my mind why was it Uganda, it saved 2 hours, and Zimbabwe 4 hours, and that's a very trivial point. I'd actually like to know you know, what it was that made that kind of difference. And I think, you know, I think that's quite important because, I mean, the situation of people that Barbara described, I mean, and that's, you're predominantly talking about India in particular, but I mean, you know, you maybe think about a different country that has a similar level of GDP or whatever, and think about how things there, such that this kind of population doesn't exist. I mean, India's clearly very specific with the caste and so on, but I remember one of the first things I read was by Joan Robinson, the economist, and she was comparing India and China in 1969, and she put great emphasis on the tension that existed in China, but not in India, for the kind of ways in which, well, I don't know, that actually had an instrumental effect on how people experienced, how development moved forward, or how the well-being of various people was protected. I think she was maybe focusing on fertility, which may not have been the best thing to focus on, but some sort of comparative work of that kind, I think is important.
I think that's very helpful.
And on that note, I'm really got to go. I'd just like to thank everyone for
well, thank you very much. Actually, when you started speaking, I thought you were going to suggest that we also do analyses within different kinds of models of economy. You know,
well, exactly,
so yes. So there's no point in comparing Norway with you know, Botswana, because it's just too different. But it is interesting to see if, you know, Norway versus Estonia. You know,
yes, that's exactly what we did in the UNIFAM report. We only reference countries on a regional basis. So Latin American countries are compared with other Latin American countries, and Asian countries with other.
Well, I think there's more. I think that is done. I think I'm reaching for a slightly different point, looking at capitalist models, mixed economy, neoliberal, you know, try to welfarist. And try to see whether there's anything.
So socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Well, they're on their own. They're on their own.